because we are just trying to do something like we're gonna make your life easier, but easier for who?
Welcome to Compromising Positions. I'm Leanne Potter, cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, a cybersecurity enthusiast and CTO for a major tech consultancy. Together, we're the award-winning tech podcast that asks non-cybersecurity professionals what we in the industry can do to make their lives easier.
And help make our organisations more prepared to face ever-changing human-centric cyber threats.
This episode's guest is Marcy Charollois. Marcy is a social tech writer, content strategist, and the founder of Merci and The Safe Place. Her mission is to enable teams to embody a culture of genuine inclusion beyond superficial measures.
And this week, we explore the complex, important, and under-discussed topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in cybersecurity. As an industry, we do an alright job about talking about hiring diversely in cyber, but that's not where the topic should end. With more and more people from a wide range of backgrounds and abilities interacting with our security controls, we need to think about whether the security measures we put in place are accessible.
We also explore how we can make a more accessible cybersecurity user journey, more inclusive password design patterns, how to be an ally in this space, and how we can make sure that we always act ethically when we think about security.
This episode is a must-listen for anyone interested in creating a more equitable and effective cybersecurity landscape.
We love this chat and we think you will do too, so sit back and enjoy our interview with Marcy Charollois. Welcome, Marcy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Introduce yourself. We were so lucky to have you appear on the show because we saw you at a conference in Amsterdam, and Jeff and I both thought your talk was so incredibly inspiring. So firstly, introduce yourself about what you do as a job, and then do tell us a little bit more about that amazing presentation you did.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, I am Marcy Charollois. Depending of your accent, you can pronounce it with whatever accent you want. If you see my name written in front of you, in French it's going to be Marcy Charollois. Just so you know, I was born and raised in a multicultural family in Paris. I lived in several regions and suburbs. I am from a traveling family, so I was used to live here and there. I used to backpacking a lot, and I think that helped me having a large spectrum of culture when it comes to humanity and diverse biases. And I think, yeah, it's a key for me today because I am an inclusion advocate in UX and tech. So yes, I speak in tech conferences in France, Europe, and abroad for 2.5 years now. And yes, we met in Amsterdam and I was talking about racist biases in user experiences.
Which I think is an incredibly important topic.
Yes.
What inspired you to do a talk for a web devcom, app devcom audience?
Because it was the first time for me to do a conference there. I think it was such an opportunity to meet people there. I choose this topic because myself, and I didn't say that, but I am from the LGBT plus community. So yes, that matters. I am not white. I am mixed. So that matters as well. And in my career, I've seen so many different racist and discriminatory biases. And I was like, how can I do something valuable for people who are not having a keen eye on those aspects? How can I help them? And it was such a challenging experience, I think. But well, I did it and I worked on this conference for about 1 year, something like that. So it was really dense because I had so many different examples to show how avoid and understand racist biases can really have an impact on the way you're gonna create your product, your service, and the way you can tell a story that is not going to be harmful for several population and people. So yes, it was totally the goal to do so in Amsterdam because I wanted to share that experience with people there.
And I wanted you to share that story and your learnings because compressing all that information into a half-an-hour talk is a big deal. And I can totally see how condensing a year's worth of material, there's probably so much more you wanted to discuss in there.
Yes.
In cybersecurity, we don't talk about people's experience enough, if at all. I'll be honest with you, the only time I can think of, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is when we're talking about employment in cybersecurity, that we should even consider representation and inclusivity. And what I wanted to bring you onto the show to discuss is actually we need to talk about this beyond just who we're hiring in cybersecurity, which matters, by the way. I am not downplaying that. It really matters to have good representation, good diversity of people and thought in organizations when you're hiring cybersecurity professionals. But I think we're missing a trick here when we don't consider that when we put in cybersecurity controls and processes in place, so things like passwords and even creating security awareness training and things like that, we are not considering people's individual backgrounds and experiences, which is why I wanted to get you on the show.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you actually see maybe training videos, and it's only when somebody points out to you and you go, oh, this is all hilariously male and white when it comes to a lot of cybersecurity training videos, which is really unfortunate because, of course, it takes somebody to point it out for somebody like me to notice it.
Yes, totally. And I think we've got a huge issue talking about hiring diverse people in cybersecurity team. But, I think it's always the idea of having quite a balance between skills and representation, which is huge. In
Yes.
France, actually, is such a huge topic, and everything is about skills and skills and skilled people. It's like we cannot really have that kind of discussion with cybersecurity teams. I think that we should absolutely talk about diversity for sure, because their experiences are going to be really different. And when I was talking about that in my conference, I was talking about mainly failing facial recognition when it comes to diverse people. The fact that some kind of eye shape are not being recognized by the Face ID is such an issue. I was talking also about the tattoo on the face of the Maori, and I didn't talk a lot about that, but some detectors cannot detect the darker skin, and that is terrible because we are just trying to do something like we're gonna make your life easier, but easier for who? So if at its core we do not have diverse people, or at least people doing trainings to, let's say, a very common group of cybersecurity, so male, white, etc., cisgender, heterosexual, straight, we cannot talk about that. We cannot address the several issues that will be the result of the lack of diversity in the team. And mainly hiring people who are just going to help that kind of team to understand that is going to be so powerful to create something different, address a product or a service for someone different. I think sometimes in tech we are so much into the tech for tech, the
Yes.
developers for developers. We lack that kind of empathy that we should absolutely have, and we need to focus more about the business and the people, the ending customers, the final users, because otherwise we're gonna develop amazing products for sure, probably technically the best experience you can do and you can have as someone from cybersecurity, a developer, CTO, etc. But at the end, what is the cost for people? Because if everything is supposed to be made to make your life easier, but this is my final question all the time, and this is what I do when I do trainings in tech teams and in startup companies in France. For who? For for who? What kind of people are we talking about? Who are your final users? So we have to understand that directly. And I think the recruitment has a lot of work to do as well. Recruiters have a lot of work to do when it comes to recruiting tech people, because sometimes they are just really focused on the cliche of the tech, and they do not understand that you can hire someone different with a different background, with different skill, probably not the best school ever, but field. So yes.
Yeah, I once saw a job advert recently and they specified the school, and it was a very, very unobtainable school for most. I'm not going to mention which school it was, but in the UK, one of the sort of top schools. And it's just like, if you're only hiring from one school,
Yeah.
surely everyone's going to think and feel the same. And I'm not really very supportive of the products and services that you're building. But I'd like to touch on something else. You mentioned it in your talk, and you mentioned it just then. And you were talking about facial recognition technology and how like Maori tattoos on the face and things like that can't be recognized.
Yes.
And authentication is obviously a huge deal in cybersecurity, and particularly things like face authentication is. I would never say anything is 100% secure, but it's a good security device because it's unique to yourself. And as you pointed out quite rightly, it's the training data that they use to create those capabilities doesn't represent society as a whole. And I've actually finished a book recently, and I'll put the details in the show notes. It's called Unmasking AI: My Mission to Protect What Is Human in a World of Machines. And it was by a lady who's a doctor in vision technology, and she's called Joy Butawani. And it's an incredible book because when she was a computer science major, when she was at university studying computer science, she wanted to create a app which you could face swap, like early face swap. Now, when she was coding this, so she is a African American woman. When she was coding this, she was like, I can't get this to work. I can't get it to like recognize my face so it can face swap onto someone else's. But what she found was really interesting, that when she had her friends sit in front of the camera, it would work. And I'm sure you can guess that her friends were white, and so it recognized their faces automatically. So what she had to do, in order to pass her degree, she had to wear a literal white mask while she was coding so that the machine could recognize her face. And she's been on a campaign ever since to highlight what she calls the coded gaze, and how we're building a lot of code that is not representative of a wider society in data sets. And I was just wondering, what, if you have any advice for anyone listening to this as a cybersecurity person, what can they do to ensure that technology like, face recognition for authentication is working how it should? And how would they go about critically challenging the data, for example, or their assumptions even?
That's such an amazing question. That's a terrible experience she went through. First of all, that's terrible. It's all about the lack of representation for sure. And I don't know if you remember that, but I was talking about discerning the neutral, the standard experience, and the non-neutral, the non-usual experiences. And I think it's all about that. We should do something that is going to, first of all, I think cybersecurity teams can absolutely adopt universal design principle. I mean by that, create security measures that are accessible and usable for, let's say, the widest range of people, but that implies to understand what is wide. Otherwise, we're gonna miss the point for sure. So I think, it works with clear communication as well. And I was talking about that in my conference too, talking about history, but with a huge H. And that means learning more about people and how they can be really different. I was talking about face shape, nose shape, eye shape, skin color, height, but it comes also with disability as well. It works too. I think, we have to get this clear communication and this clear storytelling, talking about how diverse people can be. And it comes in many forms, many colors, many ways. It works also with cultural backgrounds. So, yes, I think if we talk about communication, I think we can provide such a thing. Also do regular audits. I think that would be amazing, just to understand that probably the product we are designing is not working for everybody. So conduct regular accessibility and inclusivity audits to ensure that security measures, in order to understand that probably they are creating unintentional barriers, because you tell that she had to put this white mask because the code was clearly not made for people of color. and people from several different shape, let's say, face shape and everything. And yes, I think sometimes when you've got the habit to be rejected all the time in your experiences as a minority or a marginalized individual, you can probably think that at some point everything is intentional. And I totally understand that. But I'm going to say that I think most of the time it's unintentional. It's only because I'm
Mm.
not educated on that.
I think there's that term Hanlon's razor. Don't attribute to malice that which can be, or malice or forethought, that which can be attributed to stupidity.
Hmm.
This all reminds me of the Google image classification gaffe of a few years ago, where it
Yeah.
misclassified people of color, which was incredibly, I mean, I'm sure that none of that was intentional. That was just poor representation of the data set. But I feel like, especially with security controls now leaning more into AI, unless we sort some of this issue out, we're building these huge, what they call foundational models. These
Yes.
foundational models that are fundamentally biased. I mean, if Google gets it wrong, what chance do we who aren't Google have?
Yes, because it's supposed to be the largest documentation we have. Internet is supposed to be the largest documentation we have in humanity. So yes, I remember that when they sadly took two individuals. I think it was an Afro-American couple, and it was targeted as gorillas, monkeys. And it
Yeah.
was such a terrible experience for them because it's all about being a beast, and we have this sad history with slavery mainly, not being human. So of course it's going to be it's going to trigger a lot of things from those population or who are strongly marginalized. But I have to say that again and again and again on a daily basis when I do my trainings in tech teams and when I talk also with marginalized people in tech. It's not intentional, really. I think we have this tragic history in our humanity, and it's only there because it happened. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything to correct that. Otherwise, of course, we're gonna fail, and mainly in AI. Nowadays, it's such a strong concern that we have, and hopefully, we're gonna correct everything when it comes to racism in AI. And I think it's already done by amazing people of color who are doing such a great work, mainly in US. But yes, I think it's so easy to divide people now. And I like to say that inclusion means work together. So it implies a
Mm.
lot of balance also in the way you're gonna hear and understand that sometimes, even if the people you're gonna have in front of you is so triggered and has a lot of anger about the situation they're gonna face, it's not because of you, it's not personal, it's because of the history. So you have to understand that. You have to be really, yes, empathetic. Otherwise it's not gonna work for sure.
Mm, yeah. I remember in your talk you mentioned about your recipe for good inclusive UX. And you mentioned things like audits. And I think you mentioned about a number of questions that you should ask yourself to check your bias. Would you like to maybe tell us a few of these?
Yes, I was talking about UX mainly comes with function. I think yes, we just take really basic thing in UX, and I really don't know why, but I think it's only about the functionality and not the experience and not the design, not the way you're gonna create all the adaptability of the product or service to the all final users. So I was talking about that in my conference. You should absolutely understand that even if you only think about how functionable your product is going to be, yes, you should focus on ethical issues and you should think also about your responsibility. If I can add more ingredients in my recipe today for a good UX, I
Please
think
do.
Yes, I'm going to add more ingredients for sure. I'm going to say research and inclusion because, we have to engage with a wide range of users and especially those from marginalized community I was talking before in order to understand the experiences and their needs. Second ingredient, accessibility. I didn't talk about that a lot in my conference, but I have disability as well, so I'm going to talk about these two. So accessibility, ensure all the elements are if the elements are accessible to people with disabilities and including those with invisible disabilities. That's my case. Another ingredient, representation for sure. Design interfaces that reflect the diversity of the user base. And yes, avoid please stereotypes in order to ensure inclusivity. Let's add a fourth one, usability testing, because I think we lack a lot of interviews. I don't know why. I mean, in France, we do not have the habit to ask directly to the users, the final users, if the product is going to be useful for them. It's just like, but I think it's really cultural here, because in France, if you ask a question, you are dumb. So it's really cultural.
Mm,
So, it's just like,
interesting.
yeah, we know everything.
It's something we've only really started to latch onto in the UK in maybe the last 5. I remember doing them maybe 15 years ago with a bank, but that was definitely, it was seen as radical to actually interview, to test with a user or to interview a user. It was seen as like the craziest thing out there. But now it is starting to take hold, but it's still, a lot of people are building things without doing any interviews, which blows my mind.
Yeah, it blows my mind too, because it's like, what are you gonna do with that? when I talk with teams who are not testing anything, I'm like, okay, well, that's technically an amazing thing you did, but what are you gonna do? And yes, in France, it's such a difficult thing to say because, just like I told you before, when you ask a question, you're dumb, and this is such a cultural thing that we have to get rid of it for sure. So yes, I strongly recommend to conduct usability testing with diverse group. You can select them before the interview, and I recommend to the work of Alba Villamil. Probably you know her. I don't know if you know her, but she's such an amazing user researcher. She did an amazing work on working with marginalized people, and she's done many interviews, and she shows you several templates. I think she did a book about that, and she shows you how you can have your tests, but also your interviews with marginalized people. So what kind of vocabulary is going to be harmful, for example, for LGBT plus young group. So yeah, you don't have to talk about sexuality, but talk more about gender, something like that are really amazing, and we don't really think about all this vocabulary and how they can be really harmful for some people, some population. And she did the same thing with people of color and from several backgrounds, interviewing also working class, because sometimes you can be let's say when you have a high level of education, you can talk with some words who are not understandable. This is not what I want to say, but I mean, you can despise, I don't know if it's the correct word to say that, but in French we say mépris de l'autre. It's just like, you're talking you're looking at people just such in an inferior position, and this is really difficult to talk with people, just like, having such an honest and empathetic discussion is not even possible when you are in the mépris de l'autre. So yeah, don't do that. And yes, I think we should address also some potential barriers. And on the fifth ingredients, I think it's going to be my last one, but I'm gonna add a continuous improvement. Just do
Nice. Good
updates.
one.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think we spoke with a UX person recently, and as I was editing it, one of the things that jumped out to me is in the UK, so especially government services which have mandated the use of certain accessibility standards, got to the point where it's so folded into design now in certain parts that it's just considered good design, and also you end up with a better product, better higher quality product out of it. And I think maybe the same with representation and inclusion. Like if you design for everybody and you design so it is accessible and usable and inclusive of everybody, you end up fundamentally with a better product.
Yeah.
I think that I found that really interesting. It's like a light bulb moment, like because in the past it was treated as like, oh no, we've got to meet this standard, and everybody's kind of a bit put out by it. But flipping the narrative on it by saying this is a better product if you do it the right way.
Yes, totally. And I think we should absolutely ask ourselves if we can continuously improve the quality of the product and the services, and ask our customers, what do you think about that? What do you think about this feature? Because they are the one who are going to provide us the most valuable feedbacks. And if we do not take that as something that is valuable and not, but, taking it personally,
Yeah.
we're gonna, fail in our mission, because our work is to design experiences for others, but we are not others. And taking feedback is the best thing you're gonna do.
Absolutely. Building upon your recipe, your 5-step recipe, which is delicious, by the way. I was thinking about passwords.
Yeah.
And in particular, I was thinking you touched upon it earlier about also disabilities and accessibility. And I've been talking a lot with people lately about how difficult I actually find using traditional password fields lately. So I've got dyspraxia and probably a little bit of dyslexia as well. But so dyspraxia is connected to one of the best ways to kind of examples to describe it is in my head. This is what I imagine I'm going to type, but my hands don't connect with my head, and therefore it's more than just what we call in the UK as sausage hands or fat fingering on the keyboard, which basically means you go blah 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 with the keyboard. It's more than that, because I actually do type with intent, but there's something that doesn't connect.
Yeah.
And it makes me clumsy as well, as I'm always covered in bruises and things like that. But it's not a major barrier to my daily life. However, I have noticed a lot as I'm getting older that password fields, for example, I'm finding them very difficult to use, because quite often a lot of people and I think it's because it's not discussed in the user experience, passwords, password fields. I'm finding that when I'm going to a website, some websites don't give me the option to see what I'm typing. Sometimes you have the little eye icon where you can actually see what you're typing. And that helps me out massively when I'm typing in my password, because my passwords are, as you can imagine, cybersecurity people, it's very long and very complex. So I need to be able to see what I'm doing, because if I can't see what I'm doing, I don't know where I've made a mistake. And I've been talking about this a lot, about how I've never heard of anyone saying, let's do some user experience, user research on passwords. And particularly with the guise of, are they accessible? Now, in a world where we're wanting people to be a lot more cyber safe, and that's everyone, and we also want everyone to be able to access online services, including those with disabilities. And just as a sort of side point as well, using things like facial recognition, like holding your phone up to your face if you've got something like motor neurons disease or Parkinson's, it's not very easy. Or if you have a facial tic and your head's moving around a lot, facial recognition struggles to recognize that. So if you can't type and you can't use facial recognition, what are you going to do? And even things, I'll give you another example, if that's okay. Things like, reCAPTCHA, I am not a robot.
Yes.
There is some difficulties with that. If you're mute, for example, how do you do reCAPTCHA? And what's your options there? So there's lots of things to consider, and I just don't think we do. So my question to you, and this is a big one, but using your 5 ingredients of your good UX, how could we make passwords more inclusive? The password journey more inclusive?
I love this question. Oh wow, that's an amazing one, because yes, sometimes when I have to select some pictures in order to make my password valid or not, I am a neurospicy individual, and I don't know if I have to take it literally or not. And I'm like, okay, but there is some nuances I can see here on these pictures. Do I have to take, that as an answer? Or sometimes I'm so lost about that kind of test.
Oh, me
for
too.
platforms.
Me too. So when it
Oh,
asks,
thank you.
Yeah,
Really,
pick out the buses, and you think,
yeah,
well, I don't drive, so sometimes I'm just like, Is that a bus or is that just a big van or is that a big truck? I can't tell." Like,
yes,
oh, but
exactly,
it sounds silly, but that's it. I do have to second guess myself, and it worries me.
all the
Things
time.
like that worries me. That
Yeah.
who is speaking to whom about this? Who's actually asking, "Is this working for you?" And I don't know if it is. But go ahead. I interrupted.
No, no, but I loved I love that you say that because I am like you. I remember that the younger me were seriously struggling with that on the early internet, and I was like, "Is that a bus or a big van? I've got no idea." I am just lost in that kind of experiences. So yes, I think we should absolutely give the options of selecting your own tool because just like you said, we come with so many disabilities that are not even classified as disabilities sometimes, but it is when it comes to password and the way you're gonna validate your password or not. And I think yes, we should absolutely give the options to do what is the best for you. For example, sometimes you've got some vocal recognition, but if you're mute, what are you gonna do? If you don't have, let's say that, but if you work as a carpenter and you've lost your thumb, for example, that could be, such an exceptional situation, but it happens. So how could you unlock your phone with your thumb if you do not have one? And so many different issues and situations can happen. So yes, I think having the best variety of the way you're gonna work with your passwords. I think we should absolutely think about accessibility features. And yes, the way you're gonna, encourage the use of passwords managers that can generate and store complex passwords, sometimes even reducing the cognitive load on users with memory impairments, learning disabilities, or you were talking about what is your condition? I don't remember the word dyspraxia.
Yeah, dyspraxia. Yeah.
Okay, but with people who are struggling with dyslexia, I think this is
Mhm.
probably the word. Yeah. So, all this cognitive load that can be really heavy sometimes, we should absolutely talk about that and encourage other ways to create passwords. If we talk about biometric identification, I think we should absolutely offer alternatives as well to traditional passwords. Facial recognitions, we talked about that, but we talked about fingerprint, depending of what is more accessible to you, depending on your disabilities. Voice recognition as well can be an option, but I wonder if we can talk about flexible complexity requirements. I mean, probably we should having much more customizable complexity, just in order to allow
Mm.
users to choose the level of complexity for the passwords. You can have a lot of options, but probably do that in such a kind gamification mindset in order to do something more accessible, depending on who you are, where you are as well, because sometimes you don't have a lot of time to get your password green or red. So yeah, I think that's something that probably works for people, just in order to create something easier as an experience. Talking about probably the guidelines, because yes, when
Mm.
we think about that, sometimes the guidelines are not simple and clear. So probably having some visual aids and plain language instructions. I don't know if you
Well,
think about
Jeff,
it.
wasn't your master's dissertation on using pictograms for passwords as an alternative?
Yeah, I looked at a number of different things, and it is interesting to see that actually, again, this goes back to the end result being a better product or even maybe a more secure product. I found that password complexity rules quite often lower the security because people make a simpler password that passes the complexity check rather than
Mm,
using something that's unique and secure. They'll substitute a one with an exclamation mark or an A with an at symbol or things like that. And
mhm.
it turns out making things, these kind of strategies are unfriendly to everybody, and I imagine more and more unfriendly to certain sections of society. And it is the idea of, if we can get better at this, that we actually might actually become more secure. Is quite a compelling one.
Mhm.
Do you think there are any other things that cybersecurity teams or cybersecurity companies can?
Just before you go into that, Jeff, just while you were talking then, I was just actually did a quick Google, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so the WCAG, actually has a new criteria. So I'll read it out. So to use the password input and meet the new Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2 criteria, make sure that users can successfully interact with any Show Password button, use autocomplete to securely create and enter passwords, and copy and paste a password into the input. So that's the new guidelines. I wonder how many places are adhering to that.
Not that many from my experience. I think that is a fascinating part of looking at accessibility, is when it changes and people then realise they have to actually change to meet that. And actually, the UK government's actually quite good. You mentioned earlier about using accessible language as well for different levels of education, and that's one thing where the UK government is very good, because you will see on adverts, they will say, instead of taking a stool sample or something like that, or a medical term, they'll say, and then you have to check your poo, which at first might seem, well, that's an interesting way of putting it, but it's also a very accessible language, because anybody at every educational level can understand that.
So I was working for HS Digital at the time, and they were very proud that they managed to use the word fart in their in their description. And then they put big press releases. There was a huge press release, and I remember there was a lot of buzz going around that fart was now a medical term that they could use, just to make it more relatable and understandable to a mass audience.
That's great. I don't know if I can add more ideas on the top of what you said.
I guess just in more in general, like, do you think what outside of that particular thing for passwords, do you think there are other things that cybersecurity teams or cybersecurity companies could do to make a more neutral or universal experience?
Yes, yeah, it's all about being able to work with this balance of complexity and customizable, let's say, universal and customizable experiences. I don't know if I can add more information on that, but probably, understand that you've got a role to play, and being an ally in cybersecurity. I mean that by that, sometimes it's just so far from you. You don't even understand how implicated you can be in all of those universal experiences and what you get to do. And I had this experience with people who were so against me,
Wow.
against my work. And when you let people come in, and with that kind of softness, but not in a feminine softness, this is not what I'm trying to say, but when you take care of people, I think it's really interesting to see them being so soft with you as well, and they get the issue by the way you're gonna work with them as well, because we have so many militancy on this topic. I mean by that, it's not neutral to be an inclusion advocate, for example. It's not neutral at all. So when I come in the room, people are just like, oh yeah, okay, great, again, someone doing DEI. That's amazing. What are we going to do about that? But yeah, I know sometimes a militancy can come with a lot of violence, a lot of strong experiences, that we're going to talk about. And this is really interesting to see that in my first experiences, I remember that I used to be like that, addressing strong issues and really difficult experiences, histories about humans and individual and people. And when I just, tried to adapt more with but I was talking about, yes, having more soft experiences with people who are just trying to be against me. So yeah,
Yes.
I think it's the only way to let people understand that they've got a role to play, and they can be allies in those universal experiences. So, I mean, I'm not the only advocate. This is what I try to say. Probably I do that as my work, but
Mm.
everybody in the cybersecurity team is actually advocating for practices and policies. And the question is, are those practices and policies inclusive?
What do you think people can do to be a better ally?
I think they can think about their positions of privilege, if
Mm.
they've got privileges or not, and if they do have some positions of privileges, they should speak up about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and challenge discriminatory practices, because when you understand that you are doing unintentional discriminatory practices, you've got to speak up about that. We've got to correct all of those practices, and that way you can support marginalized users but colleagues as well, because we are talking about how homogeneous team can be, but sometimes even the marginalized colleagues in a team are not even able to fit in, and they're not able to talk about their experiences because they are such representative of these very standard experience that you don't have any place to talk about how it is difficult to be marginalized or minority in tech. And I've got this issue really commonly when I come to do some allyship trainings in tech teams. So when I come, people are like, when they are from a minority, they are just like, oh yeah, thank you so much for what you did today, because I just had the opportunity to talk about what I'm facing on a daily basis. And yes, because it's just like, when you are a minority in a team, it's just like fighting all the time the status quo. And I think it's difficult for them to talk about all of those aspects. So yeah, allyship probably involves, when you are an ally, continuous learning and listening and taking concrete actions with inclusion advocates, just like I do. But you can read books and, I don't know, watch documentaries on Netflix, for example. But well, yes, taking concrete actions to create a more inclusive environment and practices and policies as well when it comes to cybersecurity.
As we come to an end of this discussion, and it's been fantastic, there is one thing I would like to get your thoughts and opinions on, and you did
Yeah.
touch upon it earlier. One thing I did a little bit of research before this call was I wonder, and I couldn't find any stats, which alarmed me, is the LGBTQ plus community,
Yeah.
if whether or not they are reporting cybersecurity incidents, as in scams, when they've been scammed, as much as cis people are. And I wonder if there's any sort of stigma attached to that. I couldn't find any evidence. I couldn't find any stats whether, if they are underreporting, not reporting. But one has to assume that there probably is quite a lot of stigma, because one thing that I could find was, if they are impacted, it's usually extortion scams, so being blackmailed, romance scams, and things like that. I was just wondering what, as cybersecurity professionals, we can do to build a safe and inclusive narrative where people can come to us and report things from that community.
That's an amazing question. I think if we are not from this community, first of all, we have to embody the best ally we can be, and then ask directly from people from this community how we could help them, because we have amazing techs from LGBT plus community. We've got one in France, which is, I'm going to talk about the trans community. This community is called Wikitrans. I don't know if you know them, but they are doing such an amazing work. They are actually a group of UX designers, and they try to show how you can be a trans individual trying to navigate in a cis world, and the way they can be scammed, the way they can be harmed online, the way they're gonna face extortions trying to get get money from them. And it's such a difficult word for them. I didn't have any idea about all of that because, I'm not trans. So I've got, of course, the very best friend trans, but it's not a living experience for me. So when I talk with them, because they are in tech as well, when I talked with them about how it is to be a trans individual in tech, I've learned so many different things that were so concerning about cybersecurity, the way they can get their pictures also gotten on the internet, getting public, etc. And that's terrible because the harassment online has not the same proportions as it used to be. I mean, in real life, I'm not saying that it's not as harmful as it is, but well, yeah, I think the cybersecurity can probably think about talking with these communities directly. So, well, probably ask cyber communities and trans cyber communities to help them in order to create something that is customized for them and not what they think they should do for them, because it's all about being the closest, having the closest answers to their issues.
Thank you.
You
Well, I
will.
mean, we've covered a lot of really interesting ground today. And if you to leave listeners with one thing, what do you think the first thing the audience should do tomorrow based on what we've discussed?
I think we should talk about and think about biases in every form. I mean by that in UX, but also in security, and think about how we can have, as well as individuals with all our really personal experiences, some biases and that we didn't even think about. Even myself, as someone who is mixed, I understood very lately that I had some racist biases that I didn't even think about. And that's a terrible thing, to understand that even if you are advocating for inclusion, some biases you can get from your family or different part of your family, from history, is going to have such a huge impact on the way you're going to think, can create really, I'm not going to say harmful situation, but because I didn't get in that kind of situations, but harmful ideas, not understanding how I can do better. And I think this is probably one of the most dangerous positions, when you think you know something, but you don't really know. And you've got to educate yourself, even if you're working in diversity, inclusion, and equity, mainly if you are working in those areas. Because if you do some trainings, just like I do in tech teams, you have to check yourself before checking others. It's too easy to check others and judge others and tell them you're going to do that and this and that and this, but it starts with us. So yeah, I think the last thing, if I have to leave the room with something really valuable for the audience, is check yourself and understand how some biases can be really powerful, and yes, try to correct them, understand them and try to correct them.
Thank you very much. So if people want to continue this really important dialogue, how can people reach you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn. They can reach me on Blue Sky as well. And I think that's all. Yes, I'm getting older. I don't have a lot of social media as well.
Surprising how
It's
many
not
people
exact-
nowadays.
It's not exactly a nice place to be, though, is it? So, I
Yeah.
can totally understand that.
Yes, it was like, a reality check. I was like, oh, only two. Oh, yes. Okay. Well, just getting older. That's all.
A lot of people nowadays, unless they've got their own consultancy or their own website, is literally find me on LinkedIn, which is a bit of a cesspool in itself sometimes, but at least it is a way people can reach out to you
Yes,
and find
and I've
out
got
more
a
about this.
website. Yes, I've got a website. I totally forget that, but yes, I've got a website as well. So you can write my name down in Google or whatever browser you've got.
I'll put
Yeah.
all the links in the show notes so that lazy clickers like myself can just go straight to it. But I would definitely encourage people, follow yourself, because and I'll put a link as well to your video of the talk we saw, because I think it was brilliant. It's been such a really interesting topic, and I think I've not heard it really covered to this extent. I've definitely, as I said at the start of the show, I've heard it talked about in wider context of hiring, but I don't think I've heard about it being drilled down into actual people that we're designing controls and processes for. And I think we really got into the weeds with that conversation today. So thank you so much. You've been an amazing guest.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff and Leon. That's so cool. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad that Marcy agreed to be a guest on our show. What a powerful interview that was, and what great advice for making our cybersecurity controls more inclusive.
There's still so much work to be done. We really need to rethink our authentication journey from the start. One thing I've seen work is when people get in touch with their user researcher teams in their organisations to talk about that aspect of the user journey.
That'd be a good start. Listeners, why don't you reach out to your user research team today and ask to start a conversation? Links to everything Marcy discussed in this episode can be found in the show notes, and if you like the show, please do leave us a review and a share on LinkedIn or in your teams. It really helps us spread the word and get high quality guests like Marcy on in future episodes.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time. Keep it secure, and don't forget to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?